Sorry I'm late, but hopefully you still care about my thoughts on Black Widow. Because I've been sitting on them for a bit. I have my immediate, this is how I felt walking out of the theater thoughts, and my sitting with it for 3 days and seeing it a second time thoughts. And I will say that overall, I really enjoyed it. It's not my favorite of the Marvel movies, but it is nowhere near the bottom of the barrel either. If you're looking for a solid theatrical experience and you're somewhat of a fan of Marvel movies, you probably won't be disappointed by this. So before we hop in, I want to take a second to talk about today's sponsor, Likewise. Now, something that I constantly see people talking about is how much of a difficult time it is to decide what to watch next. There's so many streaming services and movies and shows coming out and being recommended that it feels like it's almost impossible to pick one sometimes and then actually pick one that you like. And today's sponsor, Likewise, is here to solve that problem. Whether you're looking for movies, shows, books, or podcasts, Likewise is an app that allows you to put in the subject and themes that you're interested in along with specific titles you know you enjoy and uses that to recommend you new media. I rarely find myself without something to watch, but I am terrible at picking out books, and this app has already been fantastic for that problem. Just by scrolling through a handful of options, I already have 3 books on my to-read list, and the only reason why I stopped was so that I don't have to pick between those books that I've added to my read list. And the recommendations really seem to match up. If I was recommended something that I'd already seen, because I obviously can't list every movie I've ever watched, it definitely aligned with the categories it said it did, and it was stuff that I enjoyed. Every day you get a personalized list of recommendations that you can swipe through, and if you find something you like, it's super easy to save it for later so you never have to keep track of what you're being shown. You can also make lists of your favorite movies and shows or things you'd recommend in specific genres to share with other users. I know I'll have my best of the year so far list linked down below so you can check it out on the app. And one of the best features has to be Asks, which allows users to ask for recommendations in different genres and have the community contribute suggestions. So if you want to get some primo recommendations in movies, television shows, books, podcasts, and more, and help the channel, head on over to on.likewise.com/Jedi by clicking the link in the description down below. It's 100% free, and you can follow me over there at Amanda the Jedi. On top of all the stuff you expect, like the really solid dynamic between characters and the great action scenes, the score is also really awesome. Lauren Balfe really killed it, and there's this really nice repeating dun-na-na, dun-na-na, dun, and a bunch of the different songs that I really like. It got me pumped. And movies like this just feel great to watch in theaters. You get the energy from the other people watching, the vibes are at an all-time high, the spectacle of the action just hits harder. So theatrically, I overall found it to be a delight. I knew I was gonna like Florence Pugh in this, but I didn't realize how much I was gonna fall in love with her version of Yelena. Very badass, lots of dry humor. She can kick me in the face wearing a blazer any day of the week. Just a great addition to the MCU overall. I always hate it when they give people fake Russian accents, but somehow hers wasn't as annoying as usual. I still remember seeing Jennifer Lawrence in Red Sparrow, and that was not good.
They gave me a choice: die or become a sparrow.
Oddly enough, though, if you nab some scenes from Red Sparrow and just imposed ScarJo's face on her body, you could have a pretty solid intro to Black Widow's backstory. And speaking of Black Widow, I also really like Nat in this. I know the movie focuses more on the dynamic of this broken fake family unit and the fallout of her individual actions, but I still feel like this was a solid story for her where she gets to be a badass. And I'll be honest, as someone who does tend to really enjoy Marvel movies, it did feel really good to see the Marvel intro on the big screen. Again, I'm not even gonna lie, I'm a simple person in a lot of ways. It felt like a real nature is healing moment. And the last time a Marvel movie was in theaters, I was still working at a gym editing videos for my own channel and for an esports org at 6 o'clock in the morning. So it's just kind of weird to see how far life can surpass and move. But there's no denying that this movie feels like a part 2. It feels like this was the follow-up to the Black Widow movie we should have gotten years ago. And I think a lot of the aspects of this movie would have hit a lot harder had we already gotten that backstory as a full piece of media. This movie literally features the background story of that infamous Budapest mission, and this movie should have been the Budapest mission. Budapest mission. But no, that doesn't allow you to set up for Yelena. Because to make a Black Widow movie after her character is already dead, you kind of have to put something in the movie that's a jumping off point for another character or another plot point. And I do love Yelena. She's probably one of the best characters the MCU has added in years, but the way around that was making the first Black Widow 10 years ago. I've always been a fan of Black Widow and the MCU, all the way back to Iron Man 2. I was blown away by how they really worked to give her the unique fighting style she deserves. I've always felt she was a great addition to any of the movies she's featured in. I love how they set her up in Endgame to keep keep whoever was left together as a team and bring everyone that was gone back, and I've always been really interested in her backstory. And if this movie had come out either before or after the first Avengers, it easily would have been the second best for me of those original Avengers movies. Iron Man would still be number one, but I think that this would be better than the other three. I really love the beginning of Captain America. I don't like the Red Skull stuff that happens, and I think this movie is leaps and bounds ahead of Hulk and the first Thor. So even if we go by the original release date of May 2020, it took 10 years for them to make a Black Widow solo movie after she first appeared in Iron Man 2 and 8 years after the first Avengers movie. And that's just entirely too long, and you can't say the same about Hawkeye because he was nowhere near as involved before or after the Avengers movie came out. And he got his own show almost immediately after they announced that Black Widow was happening. I'm super glad that we finally got the movie, but it feels a little bit cheap that we only got it after the character is literally dead. And we still don't really get her backstory. Like, we have the pieces, we know exactly what happened. And I'm not saying that Marvel, owned by Disney, would necessarily be the studio that I'd want to handle abducted young girls put through an abusive training program to become like literal murderers and spies for the Russian government. But I still think they could have done more with it. For those unfamiliar, Black Widow is a trained Russian spy from a program that takes very young girls and puts them through something called the Red Room. It's obviously quite traumatic, removes them from family, isolates them from personal relationships, and removes their ability to have children.
Is it your time of the month?
I don't get my period, dipshit. Yeah, that's what happens when the Red Room gives you an involuntary hysterectomy.
She then defects to S.H.I.E.L.D. and becomes a spy for the USA instead, and we're just going to ignore the fact that S.H.I.E.L.D. at that time was infiltrated by Hydra, so they are basically Nazis, but we'll not focus on that right now. Either way, horrific childhood, and that's essentially where this movie picks up, in Ohio of 1995. Which kind of threw me off. I hadn't looked into anything involving this movie beyond like the first teaser trailer, so I was like, gee, this isn't Russia. But it turns out that she had already done some training at this point and was sent to America with Alexei and Melina to play family while they worked to steal information from a US lab. Not her, but the parents. She just got to pretend to be a kid with Yelena. And this is a big departure from the comics, because in the comics at one point Alexei and Black Widow are married, so very different there, and Melina is usually somebody who's trying to hunt down Natasha. But it worked for the confines of the story for sure. At first I wasn't sure how I felt, and I wanted the title card intro to be an actual chunk of the movie, but it was fine. The intro scene features a dark and slowed down version of Smells Like Teen Spirit by Malia J, while we're lightly being shown the Red Room training protocols and how these young girls are separated from one another and put through hell. How Nat was raised, the different targets they were assigned, and it definitely sets a tone. But the most horrific acts are taking place in darkened flashes, blurred nightmares. Nothing specific is being shown. And I get it, Marvel probably doesn't want to show a bunch of young girls essentially being tortured and abused into killing machines. But after the emotional separation of Yelena from Natasha, where all she's left with is a photo booth slip, it still hits hard. Because at first you think, okay, this is somehow a real family, even though that doesn't make sense in the confines of what we know to be Natasha's backstory. But then Red Guardian doesn't give a shit that mommy was shot. No one cares about the kids because it's all a facade. And Yelena is confused because she genuinely has no idea what's going on. Her only memories are of this fake life that she thought was real.
I don't want to go back there. I can't take her. She's only 6.
You were even younger.
And that's where this movie really shines, their dynamic. I wish we could have gotten even more, and I realized that probably would have taken away from like the rest of the family dynamic, but I don't actually care. They were just fantastic on screen together. It then cuts through all of her interesting backstory, training, and development, and we're brought to the events immediately following Captain America's Civil War in 2016.
I'm gonna regret this.
So now she's an enemy of the state on the run from Ross. So she flees to Norway, where she ends up on the receiving end of the Taskmaster protocol. And the reason why is because Yelena sent her a compound that counters the mind-controlling agent that Dreykov, the man who runs the Red Room, implanted into the Widow program, preventing them from exercising free will. He can literally make them kill themselves. And he does. And Yelena, right after killing one of her peers to retrieve the compound, gets dusted herself and sends the stuff off to Natasha after she takes over the safe house from this dude Mason, who I think is supposed to be Rick Mason, the agent. And Yelena did this because she was hoping that Nat would take the compound to the Avengers so that they could take down Dreykov and the Red Room once and for all. Issue being is that Nat thinks she brought down Dreykov and the Red Room years ago. That was actually what she had to do to get into S.H.I.E.L.D. But before she'd even have a chance to potentially look at this compound and see that it was from Yelena, Taskmaster blows her off the road. And Taskmaster was initiated specifically to retrieve the compound, not specifically to go after Black Widow, which is what she assumes. She assumes it's one of Ross's new pet projects. Now, before we get too far in, this is not the Taskmaster that you are used to if you are a fan of the comic books. They're still move mirroring, but this is a completely different version of the character, not remotely the central villain, and I think that's a good thing. And I personally would have been fine without the Taskmaster even being in this. I'll get to who the character actually is later, but I think there had to be a better way to implement them than bait switching people with the Taskmaster character. Because what we got felt quite generic and wasted. The iconic mirroring powers are literally only used in this scene, and they don't really present much of an issue once Nat escapes. There wasn't really any conflict that stemmed from this ability after this scene. So at that point, why even bother with a modified Taskmaster? But thankfully, this character being a little bit lame and generic doesn't affect the overall movie because Taskmaster isn't the central baddie, so the movie's conflict doesn't really hinge on this character, more so what this character ends up representing for Nat. So we'll get to that later. Putting a pin in it. Either way, Nat gets away, realizes it was sent to her by Yelena, and decides she's gonna head back to that Budapest safe house to see her for the first time in decades. Which is where we get my ultimate simp scene. Yelena and Nat fighting in the apartment, leather jacket versus blazer. Again, either one or both of them could do this to me, and I would say thank you. Before they can have their lovely reunion after Yelena tells Nat that Dreykov is still alive and she didn't kill him all those years ago during the Budapest mission, the Widows and Taskmaster descend. And immediately after getting away, Yelena points out that while Nat failed at killing Dreykov, she didn't fail at killing his daughter. And she knew about it. And I like that the movie didn't shy away from the fact that she did this, but I also hate that she did it. I get that she desperately needed her freedom, that she hated Dreykov for everything he had done to her and others, but I don't see her killing another young girl to get what she wants out of that situation. But I guess that's the Red Ledger and all the darkness that she's been fighting so hard to make up for. Now, obviously, Black Widow would be quite infamous around the world. She's literally part of the Avengers, so Yelena has been able to see exactly what she's been up to, and comments that she was hoping Nat would bring the compound to one of the big Avengers, not just back to Budapest. So when Nat's like, wait, what do you mean bigger ones? I'm one of the bigger ones.
Well, I doubt the god from space has to take an ibuprofen after a fight.
But you can tell that Yelena still sees that life they had as reality. Nat pushed it away to protect herself, but Yelena still sees it as the best part of her life. So now they're on a new mission, find and kill Dreykov for real so he stops kidnapping young girls for his sick training and free the existing widows from their brainwashing. But holy shit, I love it when people that aren't in the Avengers comment on Avengers stuff in the MCU.
Why do you always do that thing?
Do what?
This thing that you do when you whip your hair when you're fighting with the arm and the hair.
I just love the dynamic between these two characters. It's great. But to find the Red Room, they decide they need to bust Alexei out of prison where Dreykov put him as a fall guy. And he has this whole faked feud with Captain America throughout the movie that's just quite hilarious because Captain America likely has no idea he exists.
Did he talk to you about me?
Who? What are you talking about?
Captain America.
But this prison break scene is pretty fun. He can't help but make a scene before he busts out. Yelena accidentally triggers an avalanche.
This would be a cool way to die.
And the score here slaps. But he thinks they got him out because they love him or something.
Oh, I'm so proud of you girls. Wow. Oh, Johnny, oh.
But all he does is complain about how boring Ohio was and how dare he get shoved in prison after doing all that. So he has no idea where the Red Room is, but he lets them know that Melina is not in fact dead and was actually the brains behind the entire operation and knows exactly where it would be.
Both have killed so many people.
And when it gets to the full family reunion, things are rough, particularly for Yelena. For one, they keep talking about how the family arrangement was fake, and we find out that Melina was the one who made the chemical to mind control the widows, meaning she was the one who was responsible for what happened to Yelena, literally losing her autonomy. She also blames Nat for Dreykov escalating to that level. She got out, he had to make sure no one else ever could. And Nat also has some harsh realizations here when Melina informs her that her mother did not abandon her and tried to find her every day, which is why Dreykov ended up killing her. And everyone seems to care more than they let on. Melina still has the photo album of staged holiday photos. She was the one who didn't want to leave Ohio. And Alexei, while still up his own ass as the Red Guardian, remembers Yelena's favorite song.
Bye, Miss America, bye.
Too bad Melina already alerted the Red Room. And you may think that Melina is continuing to screw them over, but no, this is all a ruse to help them infiltrate the Red Room, which is in the sky. You see her and Nat switch places after using some kind of phase shift tech. See, this was supposed to allow for enough of a distraction for Melina to land the ship while Black Widow initiated her tracker so that Ross would find her and arrest Dreykov the second they hit the ground. But Dreykov caught on too quickly. But thankfully they already got Yelena out of her upcoming death surgery.
Ugh, that was disgusting.
And it's here that we see how fucked up Dreykov truly is. There's a very gross body ownership aspect to this story that extends even beyond the actual mind control agent. Not only is he kidnapping young girls and forcing them into brutal abusive training and violating their bodies to make them perfect killing machines, he's also taking away their free will. And if that wasn't sick enough, all the widows, including Nat, are affected by his pheromones in a way that prevents them from ever hurting him. And his perversion doesn't just extend to the girls that he has no attachment to. He did it to his own daughter. Here's your taskmaster. After the explosion, he had to implant a chip in the back of her neck to keep her alive, and it also allows her to mimic other people's moves, fight styles, and weaponry. And he's using the mind control agent on her. So Nat is now literally facing the consequences of her actions and the horror of what she let happen. And it's all these reasons why Dreykov is a great villain. Some people somehow walked out of this movie thinking that Taskmaster was the intended main villain, which I don't really understand, and I don't understand how you would think that after watching the movie. But Dreykov is truly menacing and violent and effective at what he does. Thankfully, it starts to feel like an Avengers scene where Nat is not as helpless as she initially seems, where she's pushing people for more info and she sees all the different widows he has in circulation, his plans, how he controls them, and from where. And yup, she knew exactly what was up.
Don't take it personal, but thank you for your cooperation.
The callback!
Thank you for your cooperation.
And then she literally severs the connection by slamming her nose on the desk, which breaks the olfactory nerve so she can kick his ass a bit. But sadly, he managed to get off an alert just in time. The rest of the plan seems to be going well, though.
Slight change of plan. I completely demolished one of the engines and we are going into a controlled crash.
And since he got the alert off before Yelena could make it to the widows to wake them up, they make it to Nat to beat her up a little bit. It's actually a lot of it. The only thing that seems to save her is that Dreykov said to make her suffer, which means they probably drew it out more than they needed to. At least she got to kick his ass beforehand. But just as they're really laying it in, Yelena shows up with the compound, so she heads out with the widows while Nat gets the info on all the other widows that are still in the field so they can be saved. And this is where we get what I still feel was fairly goofy, but nowhere near as bad as I thought it was going to be based on the original trailer. The aerial fight scene! AKA Yelena sabotages Dreykov's jet, gets yeeted off the ship, and Natasha, a human with no real superpowers, jumps into the skies with a parachute to strap onto her, before kicking off to distract Taskmaster from killing them both. Yeah, somehow not as bad as I assumed it was gonna be. Somehow, it kind of makes sense. Nat grabs onto Taskmaster. Taskmaster has a parachute, which prevents Nat from splatting. And after a quick scuffle, Nat manages to hit her with the compound and apologizes. Though I will say, if someone had blown me up as a child, I would possibly still want to kill them anyway. Even if I was relieved to no longer be under the perverse control of my father's sick plans and mind control games. But hey, bygones be bygones, am I right? And overall, I don't quite know how to feel about that finale. In all honesty, the end of Marvel movies tend to be my least favorite. I've never been huge into like final big battle scenes. I always really like the build up and like the character development and like the stuff that goes into those aspects of it. You know, the outliers being like the first Avengers movie, Guardians of the Galaxy, just because the dancing's fun. I think Ronan's a horrible villain. You know, Infinity War, Endgame, even the Civil War ending was good. So I didn't love it. I do love how menacing Dreykov was, and I wish there was a way that they had built up that a little bit more into the finale, maybe a little bit more espionage versus just straight up fighting for the conclusion. Like, I get that they wanted to up the stakes and Dreykov wouldn't really stand a chance in a physical fight against Black Widow. He would literally have his ass handed to him. But the way he was able to exercise his powers in a non-physical way is what makes him super scary. And I feel like they could have upped the tension there and then just used Taskmaster better as a villain if they wanted to push that side of things. But it's fine, because I was in this more for the dysfunctional family unit and the dynamic between Yelena and Natasha, which I think they handled perfectly.
Both upside down.
We're both upside down.
So while I do really like how they handled Dreykov going into the conclusion and what that whole storyline was, I wish that there had just been a little bit better fallout of that incident. But alas, they are a family once more, and Nat finally admits what she was trying to hide from herself, that it was all real for her too. And yeah, this is how Nat gets her vest in Infinity War, right from Yelena, her prized purchase.
I like your vest.
God, I knew it. I knew you did. It's so cool, right?
It's cool.
This is also where we conveniently get the "Go forth, Yelena, with your widows and reclaim your own Disney Plus show." So everybody takes off, but Nat stays behind to put herself at the mercy of Ross. But then 2 weeks later, she's already off, ready to bust out some Avengers from the raft. So we don't really know how she got away. She said she was just gonna wait for Ross, so I don't know if she did and managed to like convince him to let her go, or if she snuck away after they got her. Even the director was like, hey, we just left that open so it wouldn't dive into another fight, so we could just kind of like wrap this up, but still kind of weird. But hey, she's blonde and in disguise now. Then we get our end credits scene. Did you miss them? So it cuts to the events after Endgame, and if Yelena wasn't snapped, she would have been operating on her own for about 8 years now. Natasha is dead, and no joke, watching this, I kind of forgot that that happened, and then it hit again, and I was like, shit, she's dead right now. But it's Yelena visiting her grave with the dog she always wanted, paying respect, and is immediately disturbed by Valentina, who is introduced in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, who tells Yelena that it's Clint Barton's fault that Natasha is dead. And like, true, but also no, not at all. Those two were fighting like tooth and nail to be the one who got to die.
Tell my family I love them.
Tell him yourself.
And this is obviously setting up her part in the Hawkeye show, which she was already confirmed for, which I was already excited for, but now I'm even more so. But I'm kind of like, wait, is she going to be like a bad guy in this? Or like, how long is it going to take Clint Barton to like convince her like, hey, I'm not the bad guy. It was some crazy stakes. She yeeted herself off the cliff. I'm also hoping that the minimal conversation she'd had with Natasha would let her know that Clint was a friend, but time will tell. So that's Black Widow. A lot to love here, especially if you're a fan of Marvel, but if you're not, this is probably gonna lose you as it moves into its conclusion. But I do think it has a lot of strong elements, but I personally would have liked to see a little bit more espionage and maybe a little bit more quick thinking when it came to Taskmaster and the Taskmaster abilities. I think there was definitely a better way to use Taskmaster, even this flipped version of the character. I don't really have issues with them switching up aspects of the character or who's the person in the suit, but if you're gonna use a character like Taskmaster and then not use their very unique and cool abilities to full effect, when the numerous ways that you could have done it are just like right there, like why bother? Why not just make a different character or use a different character? But the heart, so much of the fight choreography, the family dynamic, especially the dynamic between Johansson and Pugh, and the score are all really top notch, and I had such a fun time with it. Again, definitely a great theater watch, but let me know what you guys are thinking down below. If you saw Black Widow, did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you like it more than me? I think I have this rated at like a 3.5 stars out of 7 on Letterboxd, which is usually like my go-to for things that like I liked but didn't love. So that's gonna do it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. Thanks as always to my Patreon supporters, and special thanks to BZ Ken for being one of my newest Jedi level patrons. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Leave a like on the video if you're into that kind of thing. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I'm mostly okay, and we'll catch you all later.